Welcome back. Hope you all are enjoying the conference and learning as much as I am. Do share your experiences with the larger community out there on social media using the hashtag #ETHRNextTechME. And now it's time for our next session on digital learning. Fast track your skilling strategy. Gartner's research says that 29% of the skills become obsolete in 4 years span. With the increasing demand for more and new skills, CHRO and L&D leaders need to craft a continuous development strategy for the workforce to support the changing business demands. In this exciting panel discussion, we have a diverse group with us who will be sharing their experiences on how you can design a new learning strategy and roadmap for upskilling and reskilling your workforce at a faster pace. Please join me in welcoming Mohammed Al Hijan, CHRO King Saud University, Annee Bayeux, Chief Learning Strategist degree, Caroline Hudson, Group Chief Workforce and Organization Development Officer, Abu Dhabi Health Services Company Share. And to moderate the conversation, we have with us Tahseen Wahdat Wassan, Head of Talent Management, Petro Rabigh. Mohammed Al Hijan comes with more than 2 decades of experience in delivering and developing HR strategies, people development, organizational development, need analysis, HR automation, and AI practices. He is also focusing a lot on recruitment and Saudization, promotion and succession planning, restructuring, employee satisfaction, HR policy and procedures. CLO Award winner Caroline Hudson is passionate about transforming businesses through people. She has prepared organizations for workforce of the future across a broad spectrum of industries. Many organizations have benefited from her ability to build and inspire a team capable of driving significant cultural and business transformation, including West Farmers. Annie comes with immense experience in L&D, M&A, talent and HR technologies with international blue chips like Bosch, Alstom, General Electric, and Danone. She has led learning, design, and delivery organizations, including building center of expertise around design, digital transformation, and HR technology. Tahseen has held leadership roles in culturally diverse multinational corporations spanning several industries and shaped high-performance cultures with innovating people practices, learning and organizational development interventions. Over the years, he has gained expertise in advising, coaching, and consulting senior business leaders in matrix structures, leading the large global teams and managing multi-million-dollar budgets. So let me invite all our panelists on the screen and pass on the frame to Tahseen to moderate the conversation. Welcome, everyone, and over to you, Tahseen.
Thank you, Shashi. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I am super excited for this particular session because more than speaking, I like to kind of learn from my expert panel. To start with the unlimited continuous flow of information and everybody becoming experts within hours these days, the world of learning has become more and more complex. So how do we, the learning and development professionals, the CHROs, the managers, help our employees navigate and adapt to learning skills to survive information in the information jungle? Employees are also themselves confronted with, frankly, too much of information. Nowadays, information is available to all. You need to just Google it. You don't own the information anymore. So you just having information is not a differentiator anymore. In large metrics organizations, collaboration is becoming a critical competency, and people learn together through communities of learning. Our generation is also, our generation and the generation that is coming up is navigating virtual reality. We play video games, we order online, we shop online. Why not learning be an exception? Why learning be an exception? Why can't we learn online as well? So how do we do this? How do we deal with an ever-growing, fast-moving information flow with millions of investments and a burnt-out learning and development team and a bunch of confused learners? Well, frankly, I don't know. In recent years, our profession's main objective has been to move from structured traditional learning infrastructure to a more organic learner-centric environment. And by the way, whether you wanted this or not, it is going to happen, and COVID has really pushed it forward. Learners are becoming actors. They are becoming creators of their own development. They are not just consumers anymore. So they will learn with or without your help and guidance. How do we approach the digitalization of our learning offer? These examples that I'm going to share with you are based out of my personal experiences. So I'm not going to talk about any particular organization. So first, listen. We need to conduct focus groups to find out how our colleagues learn before we can even launch the digitalization process. And we may need to think of, we know it all. After all, we get the data from LMSs, all of us. But of course we don't. Our LMSs don't capture the time spent on the job, learning informally, time spent Googling, YouTubing questions, and quick reads on LinkedIn before going to bed. Second is to educate, not to neglect. There is an enormous amount of education that needs to be done around digital learning. We may need to think in common sense. We may understand the trends. You may need to, you may have seen some emerging in the last 10 years and wholeheartedly buy into the principle of digitalization. The third is to anticipate, to get the crystal ball out. There will be challenges facing your businesses that digital learning will help overcome. Let's find that out. And the fourth one is to rationalize. Most companies love starting new things and are not so good at stopping with old ones. This may mean that thousands of courses available on our LMSs. Digitalizing all these would mean about 10-year plan, 20-year plan. So it's actually a good opportunity once we have bought in to rationalize our offering and use our internal governance processes to prioritize focuses on what is critical for the business, define our priorities, priority content and priority learners, and stick to those. And the fifth and last one, I'm not going to take too much of time because I have an expert panel that I would like to hear from. The last one is to nurture. Once the technology is out there, the work really starts. You will need to turn a new way to learn into a habit. You will need to make your system more attractive than Facebook or LinkedIn so that people can keep coming back and you don't have to spend time teaching them to use a new tool. This also means that your team of facilitators need to learn the skills of online facilitation and become digital hosts and curators. A good place to start is to ensure that every face-to-face program you run has pre or post work on your digital challenge. Gamify the entire process. Get the learners involved. With that, I'd like to kind of move on and start asking my expert panel on what they feel, how digitalization works in the real life, in their organizations. Let me start by asking Caroline this particular question. So Caroline, skills gap is widening and is becoming a larger and more serious drag on organization efficiency globally. What is your take on this?
Yeah, thank you. Look, it's a really good question, and particularly timely given COVID. And we know that since COVID, there's been a 33% increase in job vacancies in the US alone, 54% in Australia, where I come from. I mean, there's scary increases in job vacancies that can't be filled. So I thought, you know, thinking about your question, I'd take a macro perspective, which does two things. It essentially addresses supply and demand. I mean, this is a session hosted by the Economic Times, so I thought, you know, we'll use the supply and demand lens because it is about developing skills, but it's also about making sure that we're relying on our talent only where we need to, that we're not using employees to do work that we no longer need them to do. So we reduce that demand for talent in areas that's no longer critical or can be done by a machine, can be done by technology. So I think it's really important to look at this from two perspectives. As an HR, you know, as head of HR across the board, I've encouraged my IT colleagues and others in the business, you know, the chief operating officers and so on, to look at work and the way we operate our businesses and our business models and to say, Do we need an employee to do that? Or is that something that can be done differently, not done at all, or whatever? And then we use our precious resources and talent and skill them up where we have to and where we're reliant on them. Because we're actually, well, many of us didn't have enough babies about 20 years ago to actually support the current population. You know, many countries we've got ageing populations, not so much in the Middle East here, but across the world there are still huge problems. You know, the net new entrants into the workforce numbers has reduced dramatically. You know, in the last 15 years in Australia, there's only 10% of the previous net new entrants into the workforce every year. And yet that number of people who are still with us into retirement grows exponentially. We know we do better healthcare now, people live longer. So we've got real issues about making sure that we use this talent that we have available to us very carefully. And so I'd like to suggest that the technology response is both critical to developing skills, but also to developing different ways of running our businesses, different ways of operating. And I think it was The Economist quoted last year that the annual increase in spending in the US alone on CapEx has gone up by 15%, which is great news because it means businesses are now investing in factories, machines, but technology as well. And so we can shift that budget line, if you like, from salaries and wages where we can't even fill the vacancies to technology that'll help us. So whilst the focus is on learning here, and I'm happy to talk about that more specifically later, I just wanted to broaden our thinking, if that's okay, to encompass how we can actually manage both demand and supply. So that's kind of my response to the challenge that we're facing right now, which is huge and growing.
Absolutely, I completely agree with that, Caroline. But you know, when we're talking about skills gap, we started with by saying there is an information flow that is unlimited. Everybody is becoming creator. Everybody is now having knowledge enough and more. As you said, the companies are also investing in technology. The increase in the capex, as you mentioned, has increased in technology. Now, having both these things is a positive, but still we see skills gap widening. Why would you think that's happening? Is it something that the learners are not getting what they're wanting to learn, or organizations not able to set priorities right? What's going on there?
I actually think that learning has been treated as something that's separate to work in many ways. We've sidelined it often enough, and you know, yes, there are ways of learning, you know, doing 5-minute modules and so forth at your desk, but it's really not built into work. I think, I mean, we're adult learners, do learn differently, and we learn by doing. And so I'm not a digital learning expert, but I believe there are ways we can use AI and we can use technology to give real-time feedback to people as they do their work and as they develop skills. But more than that, we also have to, if we can go back to the old paradigm of a learning organisation, we should really encourage that. You know, I know that we talk about a growth mindset. We need to build that in with the elements that made up a learning organisation so that it's safe for employees to learn, so that they can learn, develop their skills in real time with real-time feedback. I mean, can you imagine making a business decision and somehow having some feedback fairly quickly that said, well, that was a great decision, or Caroline, you might have wanted to think about these risk factors more. You didn't give enough consideration to them. I mean, I don't know how that would work. You know, the vendors in the panel here will have a much better idea about how to do that. But it feels to me that if we could develop skills in real time as part of our ongoing work. So it's business as usual with learning built in. It's not a separate, you know, training budget line item. It's a way of learning every day with real-time feedback so that our performance and skills can develop. That to me feels like the way that the future of work and learning should move.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Karen, for that answer. Let's move on to the next question with Mohammed. Mohammed, welcome. Now, the question that we have for you is, with continuous innovation underway, the required skills are also under continuous change. Under such circumstances, how should companies determine skills needed and impart those to their employees?
Thank you, Tahseen. I am very happy to be with the distinguished speakers in this conferences. Inshallah, we will add a value for those participate in the conference. Let me to just give a brief abstract or introduction for the importance of the innovation. The innovation is a continuous process for any issue in your life. And anything in the, it's a continuous process. So the most significant companies believe that, and it is one of the success factors for them to stay in the competition for a long time. Unlike the companies that they did not care about the innovation, they were out of the market when the pandemic in 2022 happens that time. So some companies was shocked and they were prepared themselves for the virtual world by developing their infrastructure to match and to co-op with the events happens and the circumstances happen during the pandemic. They make more flexibility dealing with the pandemic. Also, they find themselves in some companies with some storms in need to cope with the surviving by adapting rapid change and to digitalize their business. So with this difficulty and the tough decision that has been taken, so the responsibility of the CEO is to find a proper alternative and a proper solution for a long time, which is a must before and also must after the 2020, after the pandemic, which is the digital transformation, and it is different implementing from the company to other company, but the main important that they must implement that digital strategy to redesign their business to stay in the competition. So it's need some step. The first step the company need to before I go to steps. So as I read and I know that we need to implement the digital strategy first inside the organization, so that the change will be going to be fast and the people will understand the situation quickly. So the IT department, along side by side with the human resources department, should review the infrastructure of the company. Are they ready to have the digital? So the human resource department also need to adapt or create a talent strategy from the digital strategy to upskilling the skills of the employee, and it need an organized strategy, not just only by personal effort. So it needs an action plan. So by using and the way of the analyze the gap analysis, there is many way to set the gap between the required skills that it need by the company and the level of skills that you have inside the company. So once you identify that gap, and it must be toward to the business strategic. This is very important. You cannot identify a gap without link with the business strategy. So later on, you're gonna evaluate the employee who are getting those skills, whether the the impact was good in the business strategy or not. So if the impact is not good, it means there is a problem was happened in the gap analysis. So this is the simple way how to inject, how to upskilling and reskilling the employee skills in the organization.
Brilliant. So Mohammed, if I'm just putting it into like 3 steps process that you said, correct me if my understanding was right. So you basically mentioned that basically identify the gap in the skills, connect it with the business strategy, and then see what are the technologies that are needed to provide for this learning to be given to the organization and the employees. Is that right?
Yeah, right.
Brilliant. With that, then I would like to bring in and start having conversation with Annee. Annee is a vendor basically, and she's an expert with digital learning. And the question that I'd like to kind of ask Annee is, what tools, technologies, and solutions can an organization explore to cope with the current workforce learning challenges?
So obviously, I would say agreed, but all joking aside, I do think that it's really important for CHROs, and CLOs to really think about future-proofing their strategy, their tech stack. I have a lot of people asking me today, you know, so much effort to put into in an LMS or an LXP or, you know, a part of that system. Sometimes it takes even a year for implementation. The pandemic has taught me one thing is I need to plan for the unknown. So how am I sure that the investment that I'm making today in my tech stack is going to be relevant in 1 year? And so, you know, thinking a lot about that, at Degreed, we think a lot about how, you know, what are the major features that actually will future-proof your tech stack. We can answer for today, but that doesn't mean that in 12 months, my answer will be the same. So one of my primary answers is always around interoperability of systems. And that means systems that can talk to each other because, you know, maybe you're installing an LMS today, but how connected is that to a wider ecosystem? LXPs are really great for that, to actually allow you through connectors and APIs to communicate the data that you need to flow and to analyze your entire stack and all the activity that you have around development. But more globally, and to be very specific on your question, I think that there is buckets of features that we have to look at. Number one, any kind of system needs to look like it's employee owned and consumer facing. So the same kind of UX and interface that we would have in the consumer world, we're now expecting that in the enterprise setting. Corporate tools like SharePoint with that kind of interface is just not acceptable anymore. The learners and employees want something that is going to be easier to use, that they can have access on their mobile, or that feels like a consumer-driven tool. And when you compare a solution like Box or OneDrive to how SharePoint is, you can see the difference in those types of access points. That is going to allow them to appropriate the tool and feel like it's theirs. And so something that allows some kind of personalized ownership of the content. Mohammed, I love what you had to say about that kind of top-down mixing with the personalized. We need to make sure we have both, right? L&D still needs to stay very prescriptive about what company strategy and what the company needs you to learn, but we also need to trickle in a lot of that bottom up, what's in it for me, and create an ecosystem where I can find a balance of understanding what the company wants me to do, plus what my personal interest or my career goal interest are, and combine that into a single system. And then finally, you know, I'm a big believer in 70-20-10 model, where an ecosystem, and I'll be talking a little bit about this later, but an ecosystem of people who can learn from each other, or social learning, is also very, very important to kind of future-proof that stack. All of that underlies with a skills data. So all of those systems that you actually invest in should be collecting skills data. Exactly as Mohammed, you said earlier, that assessment that's so important to understand where we're sitting today. I would highly recommend an intelligence system, so ML or AI driven. As Caroline says, I fully believe that that is coming into force, and actually that should be helping HR and L&D to replace some of those really long assessments that we do by hand, that we are asking our folks to fill out. A lot easier way is to apply a system of intelligence of that skills to keep an eye on how skills are measured, how they're assessed, and taking signals from everywhere. We should be assessed. If we're teaching a class, we should get points on being an expert on that particular skill. If we're mentoring somebody, if we're publishing content around that and people are following it, all of those are skill signals on our level of skills on a particular topic. And yet systems don't typically ignore that. But even we as humans in HR, we ignore that when we're looking for mobility. So a system that can detect those skills and say, hey, because I see a lot of traction around what this person is doing online, I consider this person an expert on that skill because I see that. And so going beyond the typical assessments and the 360s and the tests is something that is really important in a future-facing tech stack.
Brilliant. Annee, thank you very much for that. My follow-up question to you would be, what do you see as a change in digital learning over the next 10 years? So do you see metaverses being used for learning? Will that be something that we can look forward to?
Oh, I'm so happy you asked that question. That's one of my new pet projects. I was just on one of the a metaverse that a colleague of mine was building, and I find it quite interesting. What Meta specifically and others, Meta is not the only company doing that, is building a really interesting infrastructure for us all to be able to more easily access virtual worlds. And so as the limitation of virtual has been cost and the development and the infrastructure to kind of deploy that. Meta is actually, exactly like Amazon did with cloud services and transformed the SaaS business, talking about supply and demand. The same thing Meta is doing. They're building that infrastructure for everybody to be able to more easily collaborate and easily build meta worlds onto it. So I'm hugely interested in seeing how this is going to transform not only learning and the way we learn, especially how we learn off of others, but also interested in knowing how that is going to expand virtual training beyond, crisis training that we see today. People invest a lot in crisis training, so they'll invest in a VR world. However, what you'll see is hopefully with the rise of Meta and its competitors, the price of entry into these worlds are going to be lowered. We're going to see a lot more competition from the vendor space, and hopefully it will be more generalized to not only just crisis training and simulations. It will be more generalized to almost every kind of training, including adaptive. So Caroline, just like you, I'm a big nerd. I'm a geek around that, and I'm putting a lot of hope in the application of machine learning, deep learning, to help us help us learn more through artificial intelligence and leveling or adapting to our own personal level and the space that we're in today, to bring a more richer and more personalized learning experience.
Brilliant. So, the world is changing, and what the pandemic has really done is really pushed the technology that already existed for many, many years for organizations to adapt it. And it has just made it necessary for people to not just look at it as a good thing to have, but it's a necessary thing to have and adopt those technology that already existed. With that, I'm very curious to kind of pick Caroline's thoughts on, given the current situation, the scenario in which we live in, and of the skills market and the talent crisis across the world, do you think there could be a generic but key initiative to immune organization against skill gap pandemic?
Yes, I think there is. And it's interesting you should use the language of immune, because obviously that's our COVID learned language. And definitely we've learned a lot from COVID. We've definitely, and as was mentioned earlier by Annee, we've become very agile. And we've managed to take lessons from COVID. What's interesting though is that we're now, many businesses are reverting back to, oh, I'd like to get back to business as usual, rather than continuing on this journey of learning that we've done from COVID and staying agile the way that we learned to be. So look, there is no single silver bullet, but Annee was talking about virtual reality, and I've come out of the health space where we had an associateship with the Harvard Medical School Centre for Medical Simulation. And so one of the things that that evolved from that was not just using simulation for learning, but actually embedding it in business. So picking up that earlier discussion that we were having, where I was saying, if you can build learning into your work on an everyday occasion, that there is more likely to be investment from the business because they're seeing instant results, but also it becomes a natural way of operating as an employee. And I'll give you an example. So simulation centres are often separate to the business. They might even be in another building. You go off, you spend a day in a simulation centre. One of the things that we did in my previous organisation was that we had what we called in situ simulation. So basically the facilitator from the simulation centre would come to your ward or to the theatre, and if there was a particular issue emerging, which was clearly about people's skills, because you wouldn't have an issue emerging if you were doing it correctly in the first place, but as a team you would get together, and it's facilitated in a safe way so that there is no blame. It's you know, uses a sort of an RCA style approach, but it solves a business problem while using the skills and capabilities of the individuals and teaching them how to do it differently. So together you work to solve a problem, and so real-time feedback and learning occurs, and it's usually a clinical situation. So you're actually, you know, you're improving a patient's outcomes and preventing some sort of sentinel event or clinical episode down the track. And that then moved on and evolved further to become a tool used for simulation to look at commissioning buildings. So you're actually running 24-hour simulations for the commissioning of a new hospital. We got to the point with simulation, which would be fabulously augmented by VR, where simulation became almost a way of operating on a daily basis. So even in clinical settings, we were using that type of learning where the team would get together where there'd been an issue and you would work together to either resolve it or just to learn new skills and how can we step our performance up. We didn't have the benefit of VR and AI and other tools, but I think I couldn't imagine how much more powerful that would be if businesses were able to adopt the same kind of approach and use technology to complement it and to lift its effectiveness, and then capture, if you like, also what has been learned, because otherwise it's very much just a person-to-person simulation. But by capturing it, recording it, using it as a teaching tool, etc., would be incredibly powerful. So that's probably me coming from a health background, but I know that simulation's used a lot across businesses. VR is clearly going to be popular, and I think that, to me, is a very powerful way to embed learning into problem solving, but also developing people's capability and working as a team,
Right.
not doing it as just an individual.
Brilliant. And so, Carolyn, what I'm hearing right now is in you using the words like using simulations, data to make decisions and make teams learn towards that. It's a question that I have reserved for Mohammed, but I'd still like to ask you if you'd be keen to answer that question. How you use and use the data enablement for leaders to make impactful L&D strategies?
Yeah. Look, I will let Mohammed answer it in full, but I do think that there's a lot of data available that leaders don't use currently from learning. I remember many dare I say, decades ago, triangulating data from the employee experience, patient satisfaction, and the financial results to actually understand the effectiveness of our leadership development programs, and then to look at it another way and say, well, based on those three parameters, where should we be targeting our leadership development programs? So that seemed novel at the time. And yet it's bizarre when you think about it now. I mean, that data is available, and that we should be targeting what we do. I do still feel that there's a bit of a scattergun approach to the way that we do development and the way that we try to build skills, and it's not targeted enough. And I think data from our programs and from our talent management systems, it's all there. We should be using it, and we should be using analytics to give us the information that we need as leaders to make decisions about our programs and our approach and our investments. You know, are we getting the value from them? So I won't take any more of that topic, because that's definitely a topic for Mohammed.
Thank you for that. And I think that was quite insightful. I'll move on to Mohammed and ask the same question. So how can the use of data enable leaders to make more impactful L&D strategies?
Yeah, thank you, Tahseen. Thank you, Caroline, for sharing your information. The role of data has been developed due to the tech blast. The data has become influential in business, especially in professional development and leading change. Leaders need data as a tools of changing to influence the employee and motivate them to achieve their mission and vision and goals. Moreover, data is valuable tools for facilitating rules and tasks by conducting new techniques and application. Still, the technology is expensive, and co-op with it, every organization need to look at is it as an investment for a long term. So I will give you a real example has been happened in our medical city. We in the King Saud University Medical City, we are around 8,000 employees. So 5,000 of the employee, they are health practitioners. During the pandemic, we were approved the virtual clinic. And I'm sure you hear about the virtual clinic. The patient does not need to come to the hospital. So by using smartphone or applications, the doctor can diagnose, of course, not the, at least he has, you know, and Carolina is, I am not a doctor, but maybe Carolina is, have a medical background, but the doctor can see the patient by the mobile or by the virtual, and he can decide what's happened in his face and diagnoses his problem. In case if he need an urgent treatment, immediately he will tell him that you have to come to the hospital to do the rest of procedure. So 5,000, 1,000 are physicians, 4,000 are nurses, or 3,500 nurses. So we are in government hospitals, so we need to implement this immediately as soon as possible. So if I don't have a full information about the employee, if I don't have their information, if I don't have their number, if I don't have their position title as a soft copy and easy access for me to take that information, I will not co-op with this, and the project will be failed 100%. But alhamdulillah, we are capable to implement the virtual within 2 months or 3 months. So it is very important to have the information and data, as Tahseen and Carolina saying, also Annee, very important to have data is ready. Okay, you might have data, but sorry to say that, in an old fashion, in the file, the paper. But if you don't have it in the system or in a place that will be make your life is easy and you can access anytime, that will, your decision will be late and it will not be beneficial. So this is one example. I will just give some tips to successful for the digital learning. Of course, it's not be able to implement in all the company, but it is common sense. So allow me to mention it in a quick way. First one, set an intermediate goals. Second one, evaluate the courses. Create an ideal learning. Create an ideal learning environment. Of course, you have to gather the information from the participants who are using this digital learning. Are you going to use the same way, or you can change? What kind of development that you need? How you deal with them? Are you force them? Are you taking? Oh, do you need? Sorry to say that. Do you need to force them, or do you need to use the other way? So it's also one of the choice. Develop the learning plan. Integrate your digital learning to your calendar. Of course, if you don't know how to book your courses in your calendar, this is bad. So it is very important to book your or link the digital courses with the calendar. Review and raise and repeat. Finding a learning group. Look out for the interactive courses. Take continuous breaks. This is the some of the tips of successful of digitalized. There is a benefit of digital learning, which is costly, efficiency. It will be not like before. The employee can select the time, which is a good time for him, night, morning. And this is there is also this disadvantage for the digital learning. Some people, they don't like to record the materials. They like to be in the physical and interact with the trainer. So, but by the end, the world will be changed and going to have the digital learning good for all of the companies. Thank you, Tahseen, and I hope I covered the question and answered it in a proper way.
You did. Thank you, Mohammed. Now, I'd like to have, give Annee the last word by asking her this question: how can organizations leverage learning technologies to support skilling at scale? And what should be the 3 key focus areas for all L&D leaders for the next year?
Absolutely. And I think that the answer to that, when I read your leading questions on preparation of this webinar, I was really thrilled to see that you asked 3 principles. Because at Degree, we look at really the future of learning and skilling at scale under 3 different pillars. And the first pillar is really driven by demand. Exactly, Caroline, like you were saying earlier, the law of supply and demand actually applies not only to learning and the way we as L&D will actually respond to that demand, but it's also looking at the demand in a different way. We had a CLO client of ours say something really interesting. She said, we're moving away from matching people to jobs into matching skills to work. And it's really looking at skilling as one level down and saying, if we can analyze the skills within an organization and not necessarily map them to a particular role, but map the skills to that person, and then that person all of a sudden becomes much more mobile and agile. That's what creates agility within an organization. And as Mohammed said earlier, around innovation being a continuous process, that upskilling and measuring that skilling in terms of the demand is also a lot of our philosophy. So really that kind of elastic skills, looking at skills from an elastic standpoint driven by demand. The second principle is really around woven into work. A lot of people call this learning in the flow of work. Joss Bersin called it. I saw that he was a keynote for this. He calls that learning in the flow of work. Where Degree we expand that definition is woven into work, because learning in the flow of work has been a very technology-driven type of expression, saying we can put content in different systems, performance systems. If you're in Salesforce, we can put learning in Salesforce. If you're in PowerPoint, we'll put learning in PowerPoint. It's somewhat effective, but we're still studying that here. We did a research of how the workforce learns. This year, we've been doing it for the last 3 years, sometimes with Harvard. This year, we went alone. And actually, we haven't seen that that creates upskilling at scale. In other words, it might even be a little bit distracting to put knowledge where we're trying to work, in that sense of just knowledge. However, what we do believe in is upskilling on the job, having opportunities to do assignments, stretch assignments, or actually practicing what we learn. That is much more effective on the job learning, big surprise, right? Than actually trying to just inject learning into a system. So woven into work and having that balance of 70, 20, 10, I'm learning from my colleagues, I'm learning on my own, and I get that structured learning from L&D and HR. All three of those have to have a really good balance within the organization, and every organization, the cursor is a little different. And finally, and I'll stop there, is really around everything is powered by people. I think that we have some geeks on this call today. I'm a big believer in technology, but I don't believe in technology without the human element. Mohammed, you mentioned something so interesting about the virtual clinics. In reality, we've had the technology to do virtual clinics for a very long time, right? But what was the resistance point? The resistance point is doctors, practitioners, patients didn't believe that you could get the same quality of care through technology at a distance, remotely. And so the pandemic taught us through necessity, we can't have access in person to these people anymore. We're going to lean on technologies, and the entire industry, the medical industry or the provider healthcare industry realized, wait, actually, it was here that we couldn't do that. Technology actually allows us to do that. So, unlocking the power of transformation through people, creating a wider ecosystem, not only L&D responsible for learning, not only HR responsible for learning, but everybody between managers, individual employees, and influencers or subject matter experts who have a duty to share their knowledge. All of that ecosystem is powered by people. And so that's the third principle I wanted to talk about today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Annie, for that. I'll leave this last question for all of you now. So what would be the one key focus area for L&D leaders for the next 1 year, according to you? So let's start with Mohammed this time.
I still believe, Tahseen, on the soft skill and digitalize the business and redesign it. This is very important. Why? Because according to the World Economy Firm predicting that investing upskills and reskilling will increase the global GDP by 6.5 trillion in 2030. So I'm still recommend that to upscaling through the technology, but of course by monitoring and link to the business strategy.
Right, brilliant. So upskilling using technology and linking it to business. Caroline, what are your thoughts?
Look, I'd like to pick up on a point that Annie mentioned, and it's one that I feel passionate about, and it is taking a look at what we actually require in terms of skills within a business. So, old-fashioned job descriptions often define what it is we have to do from the point of view of a function. So let's use, for example, in finance, you might have a job description that requires expertise in revenue management. So we go to the market looking for people who have expertise in revenue management. But really what we're looking for is people who can create insights through large data sets. Now that immediately changes the supply of those people. It changes what we're teaching and learning and what we would want people to develop as a core skill set. So I think if people were to focus, if organisations were to focus on really drilling down into what it is that is actually this core skill that's required, and not just put our old-fashioned functional hat on, and as Annie said, you know, match people to jobs, but actually think from a skills perspective, you know, a real skills perspective, that would make a massive difference to both supply, demand, and then what we do about the development of skills and how we use these really valuable knowledge, you know, I hate the word workers, our knowledgeable talent, and how we ensure that they add value across the business in places that probably never envisaged before. So that, yeah, that would be my piece for organisations to think about much more.
Thank you. Thank you. And Annie, what would you like to kind of add to that?
Well, Mohammed and Caroline stole my answer, so I'm just going to make up another one. No, I think building agility and resilience throughout organizations is probably the #1 factor I would love HR organizations to be focused on. You know, in the past, we've been focused on building operational excellence and, you know, creating profit through, you know, execution. That's still something that we should be looking at, but the pandemic has really taught us that organizations that can be agile and resilient are the ones that are going to survive past the unknown. So looking at skills at a global level and using skills capacity, you know, CHROs to understand skills capacity of their organization, I think is probably the best way to build that agility. So a real focus on a robust skills strategy and understanding where your skills capacity is to help you do workforce planning, organizational design, redesign, and transformation is probably top on my list.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. You know, until now, it might be that our interventions were mostly designed to accompany change projects, to lead people from point A to point B. This is not relevant anymore, as most of the time there is no clear point B. One thing that I've learned during time of pandemic is there is no point B. We did not know when it was going to get over. It's still not over. Our role is to raise the level of agility and educate the business to support the idea of co-creation and accept failures as a way to evolve. Our people will learn with or without us. They will learn through Googling it, by YouTubing it. What we need to do is to guide this learning towards the company's strategy and vision. With that, I'd like to thank all my panelists. It's been an amazing learning experience for me. Thank you, Mohammed, Caroline, and Annie for joining me. And thank you, Shashi, for allowing us to discuss this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you. What an amazing conversation it was. So many great insights on how organizations can fast-track their digital learning strategy. Thank you, Mohammed Al Hijan, Annie, Caroline, for sharing your experiences. And thank you, Tahseen, for moderating the conversation so well. And now it's time for our first one-to-one of the day on the topic of hiring beyond borders, building a global workforce with Ali Riza Isman, CHRO for Turkcell. Thank you everyone for joining us here. See you in the next session. Thank you.